Okay, let's talk about the end of World War II in the Pacific. What's the first thing that pops into your head? For almost everybody, it's going to be two things, right? The massive firebombing raids on Tokyo, and of course, the mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those are the big, dramatic, world-changing events that we all learn about. But what if I told you that's not the whole story? What if the real knockout blow wasn't a fiery explosion at all, but something quiet, something invisible? Today, we're diving into a campaign that brought an entire empire to its knees, not with a bang, but with a slow, creeping, silent paralysis. This is the incredible story of Operation Starvation, and it's more than just a piece of history. It's a blueprint for how the biggest changes are often driven by forces we never even see. Let's get into it.
I want you to try and put yourself in this moment. It's late March, 1945. You're a Japanese naval officer at Moji Naval Base, looking out over the Shimonoseki Strait. This strait is everything. It's the main artery of your country. Day in and day out, you see a constant parade of ships bringing coal, food, fuel, the absolute lifeblood of Japan. But for the past few days, something is terribly wrong. You watch 3 big cargo ships, ships your country is desperate for, enter the channel. And then, one by one, poof, they just vanish. There's no air raid siren, no planes overhead, no telltale wake of a torpedo, just a sudden, violent column of water and shredded steel, and then quiet. The words on the screen aren't just a logbook entry, they're the sound of confusion turning into pure terror. The enemy has somehow turned their safest waters, their own backyard, into a death trap. And they can't even see what's doing it. So what in the world was it? This question became an obsession for the Japanese high command. I mean, just imagine the paranoia. Is it a new kind of silent submarine? Is it spies? For a military culture that's built entirely around facing your enemy head-on in a decisive battle, this was a psychological nightmare. They were being picked apart by a ghost. None of their defenses worked because they had no idea what they were even defending against. The answer would not only decide the fate of their empire, but it would also write a new, colder, and far more calculated chapter in the art of war. And the answer, well, it had a name the Japanese wouldn't learn until long after the surrender. But a name that is just bone-chillingly accurate. Operation Starvation. And that's exactly what it was. This wasn't a bunch of random attacks. It was a cold, calculated, systematic plan to literally unplug Japan from the rest of the world. For months, the American B-29s had been focused on brute force, burning cities to the ground. But this was different. This wasn't about smashing things. It was surgical. The goal was to put the entire nation into a chokehold and just wait.
So here's the big idea. And honestly, it's so simple it's brilliant. The Americans took their biggest, most advanced bomber, the B-29 Superfortress, and instead of filling it with bombs, they packed it with high-tech sea mines. The target wasn't a factory anymore. The target was the water itself. See, as an island nation, Japan was completely vulnerable. Get this, it had to import 88% of its oil, 24% of its food, pretty much all of its critical raw materials. By dropping thousands of these mines in all the key harbors and shipping lanes, the U.S. was building an invisible wall around the country, cutting it off from everything and letting it slowly starve itself to death. You know, the craziest part is, this whole game-changing strategy didn't come from some 4-star general. It came from a bunch of civilian scientists, math geeks basically, who were pioneering a new field called operations research. See, the U.S. Navy had been using submarines to lay mines, but it was slow, dangerous work. A sub might lay a few mines and then have to sneak away. But these scientists ran the numbers, and as you can see, even though a sub-laid mine was a little more likely to hit something, the sheer scale of the B-29s just blew that away. A single group of B-29s, flying safe and high, using radar for pinpoint accuracy, could drop hundreds of mines in one night. They could do in a few hours what the entire subfleet would need months to accomplish. It was a total game changer, a shift from careful artisanal warfare to full-blown industrial strangulation. Yeah, and we are not talking about those spiky black balls you see in old cartoons. These things were terrifyingly smart. They were technological nightmares. Some had magnetic triggers that could feel the giant steel hull of a ship passing overhead. Others were acoustic. They would literally listen for the specific sound of a big ship's propellers and ignore anything smaller. The nastiest ones were the pressure mines, which felt that tiny change in water pressure as a massive ship passed over them. And for that, the Japanese had zero defense. But the real masterstroke of psychological terror was the countermine. You could set a mine to ignore the first, say, 5 ships that pass. So the minesweepers go through, they find nothing, they declare the channel safe,
And then the sixth ship, a fully loaded tanker, triggers the mine and is blown to pieces. It's pure psychological warfare. It turned every safe harbor into a game of Russian roulette. So, you take this revolutionary, industrial-scale delivery system, and you load it up with these terrifyingly intelligent weapons. What happens when you unleash that on a country that is 100% dependent on the sea? Well, the result wasn't a gradual decline. It was an immediate, catastrophic collapse of their entire maritime trade. It was like somebody reached out and just clamped the nation's main artery shut. Just look at this chart. This tells the whole story right here. The Shimonoseki Strait, that vital artery we were talking about. In March of 45, before this thing really gets going, look at that bar. 70,000 tons of supplies moving through every single day. That's the lifeblood. Now look at May, just 2 months later. It's a tiny fraction of that. And by August, it's basically nothing, a trickle. That is a 98% reduction. The artery hadn't just been clogged, it had been completely severed. And this wasn't just happening in one place. Take Kobe, one of Japan's biggest and most important ports. Between March and July, shipping traffic through that port dropped by a staggering 85%. I mean, just stop for a second and really think about what that number means. What would happen where you live if 85% of all goods coming into your country's biggest port just stopped arriving? How fast would things fall apart?
And that 85% number created scenes that are just surreal. The port of Kobe basically became a ghost town. You had freighters loaded with food and supplies anchored just outside the harbor. The starving people in the city could literally see the ships, but the captains, they refused to enter. They knew the harbor was a death trap, and they made the choice that they would rather be arrested and thrown in prison by their own military than commit suicide by sailing into that minefield. So the food would literally rot in the ships just a few hundred yards from the people who desperately needed it.
Okay, so the port's being choked off? That was just the first domino to fall. The real devastating power of Operation Starvation was how it triggered this chain reaction, a silent, cascading collapse that brought the entire Japanese society to a grinding halt. It's a perfect example of a system failure. You hit one critical weak point, and the whole network just comes crashing down. This right here, this is probably the single most powerful piece of evidence. And this isn't an American historian looking back. This quote is from a captured Japanese military report, written in 1945 for their own leaders. Let me read it again. "We are not being defeated. We are being starved." That is an admission of total strategic defeat. They understood that their armies weren't being outfought on some distant island. Their entire nation was being dismantled from the inside out, and there was nothing their soldiers could do to stop it. Let's just trace that ripple effect, because it shows you just how fragile a modern society is. It all starts with one thing: coal. Japan's industry ran on coal, but it had to be moved by ship. So step 1, the mines stopped the coal ships. Step 2, no coal means the power plants in Tokyo and Osaka go dark. Step 3, no electricity means the factories building planes and guns fall silent. Step 4, no work means no paychecks. Step 5, no paychecks means families can't buy food. And here's the final nail in the coffin. No coal means the trains stop running. So even the food being grown out in the countryside can't get to the starving cities. It's a complete systemic breakdown. The whole machine just seized up. And the human cost of this, it was immense. The daily rice rations, which were already tiny, got cut over and over until people were being given flour mixed with sawdust just to give it some bulk. People were eating filler to survive. And when an entire population is malnourished, old diseases you thought were gone come roaring back. Sicknesses like beriberi, a horrible nerve disease which Japan had basically wiped out decades before, were suddenly everywhere. The country wasn't just collapsing economically, it was starting to fail biologically. So the campaign was brutally, undeniably effective. There's no question about that. But its true legacy, well, that's what's so fascinating. It doesn't just challenge our entire understanding of how World War II actually ended. It also left behind a deadly inheritance that haunted Japan's waters for decades. So if this campaign was so decisive, why is it so often just a footnote in history? Let's look at the evidence. These numbers right here are they're wild. You have to look at this. Over the entire campaign, the Americans lost only 15 B-29s. 15. In exchange for those 15 planes, they sank or badly damaged 670 Japanese ships. That's a kill ratio of 45 ships for every single plane lost. But for me, the most jaw-dropping number on this whole slide is this one at the bottom, 5.7%.
This entire nation-breaking result was achieved using less than 6% of the total B-29 bombing effort. While hundreds of bombers were conducting the very visible, very famous firebombing raids, this tiny, specialized force was quietly and efficiently choking the enemy to death.
And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to this guy, Prince Fumimaro Kono. He served as Japan's prime minister 3 separate times. And here he is, after the war, saying under oath that the mining campaign was, and I'm quoting, equally as effective as the entire strategic bombing campaign. He's admitting it. He's confirming that the blockade was what completely cut them off. You can't get a more powerful endorsement than that.
And this brings us to the most profound and honestly the most controversial part of this whole story. After the war, the US government did this huge deep dive investigation to figure out what worked. And their official conclusion, it's right there on the screen. It says Japan would have surrendered, probably by the end of 1945, even if the atomic bombs had never been dropped, and even if no American invasion had ever been planned. Let that sink in for a second. The official American analysis concluded that the blockade had already won the war, that it had so shattered Japan's ability to function that surrender was simply inevitable. That finding completely complicates the simple story we're all told about how the war ended.
But the story doesn't just stop in August 1945. For the Japanese people, the war against the mines was really just beginning. Thousands of these smart, deadly weapons were still down there, sleeping in the water. In the year and a half after the war was officially over, 423 Japanese minesweepers died trying to clean up this mess. Think about that. Men were dying in 1946 from weapons laid in 1945, and the threat lingered for decades. It's almost unbelievable, but some remote channels in Japan weren't declared fully clear of World War II mines until the 1970s, nearly 30 years after the war ended. A lethal legacy that outlasted a generation.
I think Admiral Chester Nimitz, the overall commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, summed it up perfectly. His quote really gets to the heart of the lesson here. The most effective weapons are often those the enemy never sees coming and never sees at all. Japan had spent years building a military to fight a war it could see, a war of battleships and carriers and planes. They were completely unprepared to fight a war against geography, a war against an invisible, patient, silent enemy.
And that leaves us with a final question, one that brings this story right into our world today. We tend to focus on the loud, dramatic moments of history, don't we? The battles, the bombs, the revolutions. But Operation Starvation is this powerful reminder that the most decisive factors are often the quiet ones. The attacks on supply chains, the war on logistics, the crippling of an economic system. And doesn't that sound incredibly familiar? Today, the weapons we don't see are everywhere. Cyber attacks that can shut down a power grid, economic sanctions that can freeze a country's finances, disruptions to global shipping that empty our store shelves. The blueprint of Operation Starvation, creating collapse by attacking a system's critical, unseen weak points, is more relevant right now than it has ever been. It forces us to ask, what are the invisible campaigns shaping our world right now? And will we even see them before it's too late?